In just 30 years, it's estimated that over a third of us are going to live in cities. For comparison, a couple of centuries ago, only 3% of people lived in urban areas. Cities are the world's engine, generating 4/5 of the global GDP, but they're also responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions. In this series, we're going to be exploring how our increasingly urban lives will be affected by climate change and what we can do to make our cities more sustainable. We're going to be looking at where we live, how we get around, and what we eat, all things that affect us and the planet. In this episode, we're going to be investigating what we're going to eat and how we grow our food. The problems with food are basically twofold. So firstly, in 2050, which is just 30 years away, there are going to be 10 billion people on the planet, which is a lot of mouths to feed. And secondly, the intensive way we've been producing food combined with climate change means there's likely to be much less viable land to grow on in the future. The good news is that finding a way to produce food more sustainably could make a real difference. According to scientists, our diet is the biggest way that we can make an impact on the environment, even more than how we travel. So in practice, this is probably going to look like reducing the amount of meat that we eat, eating more seasonally, and buying local food, or even growing your own. But what we want to find out is what the challenges are of producing food for an overpopulated city sustainably.
So over the course of the 20th century, the global population grew to about 7 billion people. And about 55% of those people today live in urban areas. So there are really obvious problems with thinking around growing and producing food and getting that food to people in urban areas. Large-scale industrial agriculture has obviously done an incredible job in most parts of the world, not all of the world, of feeding and actually in some cases slightly overfeeding our population, but it's had a really detrimental effect on the environment from soil to air to water. At the moment, about 95% of mammals on our planet are either livestock or humans. There isn't a huge proportion of wild animals left. We've really overburdened the planet with animals grown for dairy and for meat. And we're also growing a lot of food to feed those animals, which is just having a really detrimental effect.
We're in a climate and biodiversity crisis at the moment. We know that there is ongoing serious loss of wildlife and insects. For example, in the UK, I think it's about 70% of land is agricultural. Farming just has a huge impact on the environment. A lot of us, especially in urban areas, are very separated from food production, so we don't really have access to it and we just buy it in shops. We're not connected to the growing at all.
We are importing fruits and vegetables and animal products from all around the world, which have a heavy impact on the environment. Everything that is an animal really has a large, significant impact on the environment, and clearing land to grow food for these animals is that impact. We're growing soy for cows and chicken and pigs, and for them to eat food that could be consumed by humans. The UK food industry produces 100,000 tons of food waste every year, food that could be edible and could easily be accessible, but is poorly managed and poorly taken care of.
There's a lot that goes into getting food to our plates, and I don't think people have a full realization of the fact that someone needs to grow the food and someone needs to transport the food, and it has to be stored, and then you have to buy it. So there's all of these things that happen before the food even arrives to you. So what are we doing to try and produce food more sustainably? One idea that seems on the brink of runaway commercial success is large-scale indoor growing. We went to check out a warehouse in Grimsby where they can grow a huge array of produce while controlling the light, humidity and temperature without the need for soil. I'm here in Scunthorpe with James. We're at the Jones Food Company. Can you tell us what it is that you do here?
We grow leafy greens and herbs in a very sustainable, clean environment.
This is an indoor farm. There's no soil, there's no natural sunlight.
No.
How does it work?
So effectively we have 12 kilometres of LED light stacked 17 rows high. So we cover 26 tennis courts in growing area. What happens is we put seed on a substrate, which acts as like a soil or binding agent, and then we run effectively a nutrient-rich water over it every day for about 4 weeks, and then we harvest it. By growing this way, we have no season and year-round productivity.
And how sustainable is it? Obviously there's lights that need to be going on and things like that, so how does it work?
We own and operate our own renewables within the site. So at times 28% of our energy is completely renewable.
And is that solar panels that you have on the
Yeah,
factory?
that's solar on the roof and solar thermal to help heat the refrigerant which goes into the chillers to keep the ambient temperature where we need it to be. No one's ever really worked out how much your food costs the planet when they take into trucking, exporting, packaging, all the things that it has to do before it even reaches your plate. So there's this huge carbon problem that I see, and by doing it this way we can grow all year round. Food will be grown more readily for a consumer market this way in the next 10 to 20 years.
Do you think that complexes like this could be built in cities in the future?
Firstly, yes, but it will be built near cities. So if you take London, for instance, you don't put something of this size in the centre of London because it will cost 100 million just for the land.
Yeah.
This will be on distribution centres and things that serve these conurbations as they do now, and it will be very close to where you need your food. And what we're working on is working with our partners where you'll be able to order online, and then when your normal shop comes round, within an hour, it will be cut, packaged, delivered to your home within your time slot.
Wow.
And that will bring the freshness, it will bring less waste, no food waste, because you'll use this on the day rather than taking a packet and going, leaving it in the fridge for 4 weeks and then throwing it out.
So that's really a game changer if you think about how long it takes for food to get from farm to table at the moment.
Yeah, this is a game changer where we want to work in hours.
How feasible is that?
Is more than feasible. It could be done now. Vertical farming will work and become more mainstream when the price is at the same price that anyone in the country is willing to pay. If you can have a high nutritional value product with a longer shelf life, so you get less waste, and it can be at the same price, it's just a no-brainer.
Spaces for mass indoor growing are likely to become much more common, and huge corporations are already putting their money behind it. But what else is happening in the world to make sure that we have a more sustainable grub in the future?
So there are two really interesting schools of thought and they complement each other. So one is that we use technology, and there's lots of technologies out there, to bring food production closer to cities, to kind of embed them in the city system. So we might be looking at vertical farming, not using soil as a means of production or growth. It might be even growing underground using LED lights, or growing in water, hydroponics. So taking the things that we've really exploited so far, such as soil or the sea, out of the equation and just focusing on growing in the cities using different mediums. The other solution is around community growing and using urban green spaces to grow in a way that gives better access of fresh and healthy food to people living in cities, and reducing, the emissions that come from transporting fresh food from outside of cities. I mean, it's unlikely that the community of Hackney, for example, will be able to completely self-sustain and grow enough food, enough fresh and healthy food, and diverse enough a diet to feed everybody well in Hackney. But I think these are really, really good solutions, from edible forests to community growing sites to allotments, are really positive in terms of just kind of reskilling people and reconnecting people to where their food comes from. And it's not that long actually since a lot of Brits, for example, would have dug for victory during the Second World War. And people were able to revive those skills and find really innovative ways of growing fresh and healthy food in city areas or in urban areas. The French did it as well. They had sort of victory plots, and a lot of cities across the US also had urban growing during the Second World War. So those skills and that knowledge still exists in living memory, and there are movements all over the UK to revive those skills. So that's kind of a second solution that probably realistically would sit alongside the technological solution. There's a number of different solutions, and I think there has to be a whole raft of different measures taken to feed that many people. One of the strongest solutions that we have is for everybody around the world to follow more of a plant-based diet. This is some of the strongest evidence that's come out from across the scientific community over the last 5 years or so, that we're really overly reliant on animals as a food source, and we actually use a lot of land around the world to grow food to feed those animals. So it's just a really imbalanced way of coming at it. If the vast majority of people around the world could cut back on their meat consumption, that could look like a much more sustainable food future.
The likelihood is that countries are going to take on a smorgasbord of all of these different solutions. There isn't one fits all for everything, and one thing that will go hand in hand with large-scale indoor growing is hyper-local community growing. Back in the 1950s, people in the UK produced more than double the amount of food that they ate themselves. And this knowledge of home growing, while it might seem like a really distant memory, is actually a little bit closer than we might think. Here in London, 1 in 6 people have tried their hand at growing themselves, and it's only going to get more popular. So we are off to find out a little bit more about what community growing is all about.
So growing communities was set up to create a basically relocalised sustainable food system that provides a very practical alternative for local people. We started with a veg scheme, so that's what we set up 22 or so years ago. And the veg scheme basically buys food from organic growers, predominantly within 100 miles of London. We pack veg bags at our site kind of 5 minutes away from here, and then distribute them to collection points around Hackney where people pick up the veg bags and fruit bags. We also have a farm in Dagenham and a patchwork farm in Hackney, and so this is one of our patchwork sites. It's basically a farm that's made up of smaller pockets of land, and we grow salad and produce for the veg scheme here as well. It provides a really great local example for people of what organic growing is and how we can grow food in a way that benefits biodiversity and the climate, but it also allows us to grow the most perishable food really locally to where it's going to be consumed. So for example, we grow salad here and they're really nutritionally dense, but growing them locally to where they're consumed just means there's minimal transport, minimal refrigeration, and people are just getting the most nutritious possible food as close to where it's grown as possible.
Growing is just one piece of the puzzle, but what about the stuff that we're actually eating?
You know, plants and vegetables and fruit have a smaller carbon footprint, but obviously it depends on where it's coming from. We should eat more seasonally, we should eat locally. This will definitely reduce your carbon footprint. It's not only, you know, doctors and scientists are now saying eat more plants. The UN has encouraged people around the world to eat more plants because of the significant impact it has on the planet. Far less than what it is from eating animals. If we can reduce the amount of food that we do buy, I think going to a supermarket store with a plan, with an idea set, knowing what you're going to eat. And of course, if you have leftovers, eat your leftovers.
Whatever the future holds, it looks like there's going to be some massive changes in the way that we produce food. And from making this episode, my biggest top tip is to do some research, find out more about what you're eating. And if you have any space at all, why not try your hand at growing? We have loads of other videos on how you can grow your own, so go and check them out after this. And now I want to know what you think the cities of the future are going to look like. We've been investigating where we live, how we get around and what we eat, but how do you think climate change is going to affect the cities of the future? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to be the first one to see all of the Hubbub videos. And that's the end of the episode. To find out more and to get inspired, head to our website www.hubbub.org.uk, where you'll find loads of top tips to give you the spark to do things differently. Tune in for the next episode and come and join the Hubbub.